Hey kids, we're going to talk about Bioshock, not because it's some lost forgotten gem that warrants further examination. If you're watching this video, you've definitely played the game. I'm mostly just out of ideas and felt like sharing what few I do have. Bioshock was released by Irrational Games in 2007, and Irrational Game incidentally being what you get when you take the square root of a real number game. The game is a first-person shooter with a large emphasis on exploration that takes place in an underwater city heavily influenced by 20th century dystopian novels. We'll talk about that later. In addition to a variety of firearms, the player also has access to plasmids, genetic enhancements that boost your abilities and basically turn you into a wizard, if being a wizard meant shooting bees out of your arms and having an unhealthy obsession with plumbing. I'm going to go over the story in an unhelpful manner, review the gameplay, and then speak of the philosophical, political, and textual themes present in the game. So without any transition, let's proceed. So you start the game as this guy with a symbolism tattoo flying on a plane over the mid-Atlantic, and because it's pre-9/11, not only do they let you smoke, but they also let you take your pet gun on the plane, and it goes about as well as you'd expect. Your alkali-based aircraft crashes into the ocean conveniently next to a lighthouse, but also inconveniently the only lighthouse that leads to an underwater city created by an eccentric ideologue so in love with offshore accounts that he made a place that's off all of the shores.
Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No.
You get contacted by this Irish stereotype / literary reference who's like,
Oi there, laddie! That Mr. House-looking fellow microwaved my family like a potato in tinfoil, so if you wouldn't mind, would you kindly stick this mystery needle in your arm, start kidnapping these wee girlies, and go through hell and high water to give that man a sternly worded letter?
Seeing as how this is a pretty reasonable request, you oblige this man you just met and traverse to the city of Rapture, fending off automated security systems, the United Labor Union of underwater basket weavers, and a never-ending horde of Robin Williams impressionists.
Father, why have you forsaken me?
Fuck you, my friend. Enjoy your day.
You finally make it to Andrew Ryan's office, where he invites you to some S&M roleplay.
A man chooses, a slave obeys.
Sadly, you get way too into it before you can remember the safe word, so Putt-Putt goes to the moon. With that taken care of, Atlas reveals he's not actually an Irish literary reference, but a mobster literary reference, and also that you're a test tube baby genetically designed to be mind-controlled and used as a super weapon to take down Ryan. And while you may think this is an incredibly unreliable and complicated contingency plan, I for one am just glad I can now shift the blame for my poor gameplay onto Atlas being incompetent. So Frank over here tries to dispose of you because you're not useful to him anymore, but you're saved by this woman named Tenenbaum, who's like a scientist mom to all the girls you've been manhandling. She removes the mind control from you, and it makes Frank so mad that he threatens you with another good time.
I says, would you kindly go get stepped on by a big daddy?
You make your way to Frank, where you find he's preparing himself for the 2014 Sochi Olympics. After all your experience with plasmids so far, you decide that drugs aren't very dope, and you decide to stick it to him. He knocks you to the floor, but as it would turn out, to participate in the games you need to be vaccinated. Frank hasn't had one his entire life, so the girls administer them all at once, which has some ill side effects, including mild inflammation and death.
Remember, winners don't do drugs.
There are two endings to the game. If you give every girl in the game head pats, everyone turns into arms and you spend way too much time in the bathtub, but if you kill more than one, you take over the world with an army of genetically altered superpowered schoolgirls. That is to say, there are no bad endings, because in either case you're rewarded with a harem anime. If I had to approximate, Bioshock is about 40% running and shooting, 40% exploring and looting, and 20% plumbing and computing. The most apt comparison I can make to other games is probably one of the Fallout games or Donkey Kong 64, except people actually like this one and with more monkey screeches. The second one may seem like a weird comparison to make, but at its core, Bioshock is really about getting stuff. Every level has objectives, and you can make a beeline for them if you really want to, but doing so will put you at a disadvantage later in the game when enemies become more powerful. The game has this really open and well-developed world, and it rewards you for searching it thoroughly. Intensive scavenging and exploration is often the only way to find a certain tonic or the elusive but extremely valuable weapon upgrade station. It's also one of the only means of learning about Rapture or solving door combinations, as most of the information in the game is left behind on radio tapes that you find scattered around the map. You can also take pictures to earn bonuses against enemies and have to kill big daddies to collect Adam from little sisters. There's a lot to look out for, so on most levels I end up on an elongated fetch quest for undetermined loot well before I start working towards moving the plot forward. You'd think playing hide and seek with bags of potato chips would be kind of exhausting after a while, but enemies appear very frequently. Splicers even seemingly respawn and appear from random areas, and the concept of a crazed junkie attacking you from the shadows of a destroyed city filled with 1950s gee golly advertising fits the mood really well. It's not scary per se, more like I need to set my brightness to Discord light theme, but knowing that a threat can be around any corner keeps you on your toes and keeps the gameplay from getting too slow. For what it's worth, I think the hacking minigame is okay. The problem is that while it's possible to beat the game without hacking, there's a massive incentive to hack most machines, and thus it becomes an integral part of Bioshock's mechanics, so you end up doing a lot of plumbing, and a minigame that starts out as just okay slowly develops into intolerable. Towards the end of my playthrough, I just started shooting defense systems even if it was more beneficial to hack them, because I couldn't be bothered. I feel like my main issue with the hacking in Bioshock is speed. When I think of hacking or lockpicking minigames in Bethesda games for instance, they're really quick, so win or lose, it doesn't interrupt the flow of the game too much. There's also no time limit, so I don't have to stress out or exert all my brain power trying to open a door. Now don't get me wrong, I like puzzles. Part of what I really like about video games is how they let you do things you could never do in real life. You know, like, be smart. But that's not to say this game is especially complex, and navigating the pipes around the obstacles from point A to point B requires a master's degree. The difficulty stems from having to quickly search for the right pieces of piping to get you to the end in a race against Gatorade, which will electrocute you and force you to reset if you don't make it in time. I don't spend most of my time figuring out the path, I spend most of it clicking to reveal tiles and then looking for the ones I need. It feels way less like a puzzle and more like a reflex test, and if that was the developer intent, then good on them. It wigs me out. Also, despite this game being predicated on you being swift, it takes a weirdly long time to complete, especially if you have to start over and navigate the menus again. Later on when hacking starts to get more difficult, the game does offer you alternatives like automatic hack tools and the option to buy out machines for a certain amount of money. Buying out is pretty expensive and usually not worth it, and auto hack tools have to be crafted or are very rare drops, so it doesn't completely mitigate the game. Engineering tonics can help somewhat, but their performance really varies due to the fact that pipes and obstacles are randomly generated. This means that occasionally you'll find puzzles that are literally impossible to solve because they do not spawn with the pipes required to complete them, or have their exits completely blocked by alarms. It may sound like I have a personal vendetta against this minigame, and that's because I do. But I appreciate what the devs were trying to do, and I like that they were trying to add variety to an already fleshed out experience. And when it comes to Bioshock, variety is the name of the game. Just kidding. It's Bioshock. I just said that. It's not variety. Now get in this wheelchair, we're going to the pharmacy to pick up your Alzheimer's medication.
Who can blame a lady who craves variety?
On the real though, there's a great plethora of weapons and ammo types, as well as plasmids and tonics you can get to build your character, and you can swap them out really easily. The levels are also really non-linear and open, so there's a lot of different ways to defeat enemies, solve problems, and get to places, with some being more efficient than others. You're able to craft certain items that you invent too, mostly special ammo types from stuff you scavenge in the city, which is a good alternative to spending a lot of money on it or looking for a rare drop, although what usually happens is you craft something you already have the maximum amount of because you forgot to use it. You can also interact with the environment in a bunch of ways, like zapping water or throwing explosives with telekinesis. You have a lot of options. Like if you can't find the combination for a door lock, sometimes you can hack it instead. And if you don't want to hack because you're a pipeline protester, you can assert your intellectual dominance in other ways, like the use of anti-armor rounds. There's even a kind of stealth system in the game that you can create by combining certain tonics together. It lets you run around and bonk people with your wrench. It's pretty fun. The final boss is pretty great.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey.
You get a lot of opportunities to use mechanics in the game to get creative while fighting Fontaine, who's morphed into a super mutant with an incredibly limited dialogue pool.
Come and get it, Boo! Come and get it, Boo!
No way! I can't believe this!
I think a minor issue with Bioshock is there's honestly a little too much variety. There's a good amount of plasmids and tonics in the game, but only a limited amount of slots you can use for them. The idea is you have to make the hard choice of which ones to bring with you, but I never found myself struggling to choose what I wanted. By the time I got my third plasmid slot, I was pretty much set because some plasmids just seemed too situational to be worth bringing along, or just not as good as the one I already had. It's a shame because there's a lot of cool powers in the game that I never ended up using. It's not just plasmids either. I think the most I used the chemical thrower was during the final boss, because that's when I remembered I had it. On the whole though, the gameplay is fantastic and I definitely see why some people consider it a masterpiece. I think the fact that most of my critiques are just minor complaints are sort of representative of that. The sound design and music are great, the atmosphere and the art is super unique and cool, the animations are fluid, and the machine gun hits what I'm aiming at least 50% of the time, so I'd say it's pretty good. So before I plagiarize the Wikipedia page, I should probably summarize the story behind the setting first, as it's important to the references and political themes therein. As I said, the tale of Rapture's collapse is told through audio tapes scattered around the game's levels in a non-linear fashion. When you piece them all together, it kinda goes like this. In 1947, local businessy businessman and Walt Disney lookalike Andrew Ryan gets really salty about paying taxes and decides the most logical choice is to develop an underwater utopia for all the great minds in the world to gather where they can practice their arts and crafts without the restrictive burdens of things like government influence and morality weighing them down. One such great mind is scientific savant Bridget Tenenbaum, who discovers a form of sea slug that can alter a person's genetic code through the production of a material called Atom. I don't know how this translates to shooting fire out of your hands. With the help of smuggling mob boss Frank Fontaine, Tenenbaum is able to distribute this discovery to the masses, and soon tonics and plasmids have rapidly altered everyday life in Rapture. Unfortunately, Adam is highly addictive and has some pretty wild side effects, like forcing you to perform an unnecessary amount of exaggerated gymnastics. Apparently, Fontaine having a monopoly over the wonder drug that influences every aspect of Rapture gives Andrew Ryan the jitters, so he tries to have Frank arrested for smuggling, only for Fontaine to die in the ensuing police shootout. Fontaine happened to believe in reincarnation, however, and does so as an Irish socialist for some reason. He begins to create an uprising among Rapture's poor who have been scorned by a city that doesn't exactly have the most robust welfare system. Meanwhile, Ryan nationalizes the plasmid industry under his own company, despite it being directly contradictory to his own values. It all comes to a head on New Year's in 1959 when Atlas begins a civil war for Rapture by staging several high-profile attacks across the city. At this point, almost everyone is a genetically enhanced dope fiend with magical powers, so anyone who doesn't die in the resulting fighting is left wandering the city in a crazed state. With the city in shambles, Ryan is hiding behind a wall of defenses and splicers, and all Atlas has left is his backup plan. A perfectly obedient and swiftly growing child implanted with Ryan's DNA who can sneak in and finish the job.
That's me.
As I said at the outset, Bioshock's thematic influences come from 20th century dystopian novels attempting to predict what the future of mankind would look like as a result of rapidly changing industrial societies. Since these stories take place in the future, at least at the time that they were written, they incorporate science fiction elements along with their political themes to describe worlds with highly developed technologies, but governments or cultures that have significantly regressed into authoritarian regimes. These include George Orwell's 1984, Aldous Huxley's The Brave New World, and of course, Alfred Yankovic's UHF.
You get to drink from the fire hose!
Undoubtedly, the largest influence on Bioshock is the works of Ayn Rand, a Soviet-American author from the mid-20th century best known for her books The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, as well as her philosophy of objectivism. And it's kind of a shame because in the words of another famed American philosopher,
I hate Ayn Rand.
with that bias acknowledged, I will try to be as fair as I can. If you're still mad though, I'll give you this bit of info so you can roast me in the comments. I didn't actually read any of her books for research on this video. I'm sorry. I suppose I just wasn't interested in reading my grandma's Heart of Darkness-length tirade against the government that could have easily been summed up by saying,
"Any government that is more than a police force cannot rule. All they know is taxes, regulation, stifling the growth of the individual for the lazy, eat hot cheap, and lie."
That's very interesting, ma'am. The ice cream machine is still broken? References and allusions to Rand and her work are all over the place in Bioshock. Some of them are pretty out in the open, like in the character names.
Come to Rapture! We have Atlas Shrugged, Frank Fountainhead, Rule 63 Ayn Rand, and Rosenbaum.
There's also propaganda that is a direct play on Who is John Galt, a repeated phrase in Atlas Shrugged, as well as muscular bronze statues and neon signs with fonts that resemble those found on some editions of Rand's books. Ryan's desire to create Rapture stems from a want to create a utopia where the great minds of humanity will be unburdened by government tampering, moral objections, or freeloaders hoping to bank off their success. This is very similar to Atlas Shrugged, where the captains of industry decide to disappear to a hidden civilization to get away from an over-regulatory government and create a capitalist paradise based on laissez-faire economics. All of that is kind of surface level though, and to understand how Andrew Ryan makes his decisions, we have to talk about objectivism. So, to grossly oversimplify, objectivism is a philosophy that states that every person is a supreme being whose ultimate goal should be to seek out their own self-interest and happiness, and that their values should revolve around that end. Further, it claims that a person's reality should be shaped by reason, as it is the only objective way to perceive the world, which is a fancy way of saying you should achieve knowledge through your own experiences and learning rather than the perceived morals and virtues prescribed by society. Objectivism puts a heavy emphasis on personal and property rights as the means to achieve these goals, and as such, Ayn Rand felt that laissez-faire capitalism was the best possible governmental system and the least intrusive to individuals. Objectivism is against altruism and welfare states, as the idea of another person's life having value should only matter to you if you personally decide it does rather than society doing so for you. For similar reasons, objectivism tends to dislike religion as a societal groupthink, but does like the freedom to have it. Now what if I chose in my self-interest that I valued your death more than anything and decided to shoot you in the head? Well, fortunately for you, according to objectivism, the use of force is irrational as people cannot reason under threat of violence, so you can rest assured that I will have egg on my face when you no longer have one. In short, objectivism is the concept of pursuing your own interests with no regard for any other person or societal and moral expectations, as you know what's best for your needs and are objectively the most important thing in life. Or as we say in the 21st century, so Andrew Ryan is an objectivist, or at least a die-hard libertarian. He makes this position clear both at the beginning of the game and in an audio tape explaining his personal philosophy.
I believe in no God, no invisible man in the sky. But there is something more powerful than each of us, a combination of our efforts, a great chain of industry that unites us. But it is only when we struggle in our own interest that the chain pulls society in the right direction. The chain is too powerful and too mysterious for any government to guide. Any man who tells you different either has his hand in your pocket or a pistol to your neck.
In Atlas Shrugged, the utopia created by John Galt and company ends up doing well, mostly because Ayn Rand is the author, and the overbearing government collapses into disarray. In Bioshock, Ryan's utopia
Sounds like another tunnel collapse. Welcome to Rapture, the world's fastest growing pilot joke.
Suffice to say, I don't think Bioshock has a very high opinion of objectivism either. So much of what leads to Rapture's downfall is a result of Ryan not dealing with the problems facing his city on account of the way he structured it socially and politically. Genetic alterations are commonplace because while that sort of thing is a big ethical debate topside, there's no societal barrier to be had under the ocean where people are guided by self-interest. Andrew was told beforehand about the rising popularity and use of plasmids, but blatantly ignores his advisors because he doesn't want to regulate Fontaine's business, as it would be a restriction of property rights. It's only after Ryan perceives Fontaine's hold on life as a threat does he do anything about it, and it leads to him absorbing the plasmid business under his own name, an action contrary to his belief system. This betrayal is part of what leads to the Civil War, but it's also spurred on by Rapture's poor, who are unable to get help because Ryan believes that those who are poor are such because that is the spot they have earned, and no one has any obligation to get them out of it. Atlas is able to take advantage of this discontent to raise his army. There's some minor socialist undertones here, but I don't think the intention was to show Atlas as a leftist counterpart to Ryan. If anything, he's a grifter taking advantage of the strife of the working class for his own ends, making him just as self-interested in power as Ryan is. There's also some subtle things during the actual game. The fact that you can buy out machines during your hacks, especially security drones and cameras, implies that even self-defense equipment has a price at which it can change sides. It's so free market that even if you own a turret, someone with enough money can pay it off to shoot you instead. Dr. Steinman and Sander Cohen are two characters you meet on the way to Ryan's office, and both butcher people for the sake of their art, the former being plastic surgery, and the latter being, House of Wax homages? Anyway, they're implied to be pretty spliced up, but at the same time they seem super egged on by Ryan's philosophy, not even for an instant considering the value of human life, because it doesn't actually pertain to the way their art turns out. An ironic idea considering that Sander Cohen's stage is all about capturing the beauty of death, and yet he couldn't care less about the actual ethics around it, as it doesn't actually get him any closer to his goal of producing a masterpiece.
Cohen, you sick fuck, let me out of there!
Finally, we have the famous scene with Andrew Ryan and the player in his office. At this point, it's been half revealed to you that you're under some form of mind control. Ryan confirms this when instead of engaging him in a climactic boss fight, he calmly invites you to his office where you enter a cutscene, stripping you of your ability to do anything. He plays charades with you by using your command phrase, "Would you kindly," and then orders you to kill him. This scene is unnerving because it's slow, it's dark, and Ryan howling at you to obey him through a bleeding mouth while you have no agency over your actions puts you in a place of discomfort that you are not allowed to escape from.
Obey!
While you succeed in your task, you fail to defeat Ryan. Andrew's death is inevitable, but by forcing you to kill him without your volition, he proves that he is a real person and you are not. Ryan chooses to die. You commit the murder, and you have no say in it. For if a man has truly his goals and aspirations, his memories, his likes and dislikes, his choices, and you don't have any of that because you were designed to follow the instructions of somebody else, what even are you?
What is a man?
Now, as much as I would like to say that Bioshock is about dunking on a long-dead author and saying that her ideas could never be implemented practically, because, you know, it would make me feel warm and fuzzy inside, I think it's a bit rude and also not what it's going for. Instead, I think the game is trying to draw attention to the fact that the ideals of ultimate freedom in Rapture caused its collapse, while also noting that in reality, it really wasn't that free at all. As Ryan X-Factorated over the radio earlier, Rapture is held together by the Great Chain, a metaphor for how all people are linked together by following their own motives. Yet chains have an obvious symbolic association with prisoners and slaves, an intentional irony as there are many in Rapture who are unable to control their own destinies. The Splicers are slaves to their addiction to Adam, unable to reason or think for themselves anymore, becoming violent and enraged easily as their own desires are a mystery even to them. The Little Sisters are slaves to their symbiotic relationship with the sea slugs, stuck in a ghoulish state where they unthinkingly try to harvest Adam from corpses, even after they've been liberated. The people of Rapture, especially the poor, are slaves to the will of Fontaine Futuristics and its monopoly on Adam, or Ryan and his hold on the city council and Ryan Industries. You could theoretically try to start a competition or look for someone else, but that risks torture or death.
Fontaine's putting the screws on us, and double. He's squeezing us out of 80 points of our cut with the threat of turning us into Ryan if we don't play ball. Son of a bitch. Sammy G comes and tells me he's thinking of going to the constable. And the next day, Sammy G was found in a sack in a salt pond. We got no choice here. We stay on Fontaine's crew and we're gonna catch the gallows. We take powder and we up like Sammy G. Oh, there's gotta be another way.
And of course there's the player, who not only doesn't have agency over their own actions as they're being controlled by Atlas, but has their memories implanted, removing the freedom to have their own experiences or personality as well. I think what Bioshock wants to do is make you ponder about the nature of freedom in a more nuanced and balanced way. The dystopian novels that inspired Bioshock's story, along with real-world examples, speak of how overbearing and watchful governments are unethical and not to be desired. The game contends, however, that the opposite conclusion, making people 100% free, would be just as unethical, as providing them with that much leeway gives them the opportunity to take someone else's freedom away. Therefore, the question becomes, if one system allows the government to force you to work for no pay for state interests, and the other allows your employer to force you to work for no pay for the CEO's self-interest, is there a significant difference between the two? And what is it? Despite what we sometimes like to tell ourselves, we haven't entered post-apocalyptia yet, and until that day comes, life remains complicated. That probably means figuring out the delicate balance between letting people do as they please so they can be happy, but not so much it interferes with the lives of others. That's not an especially hot take or anything, nor is rebuking fringe ideologies. I don't think Bioshock wants you to lean in any particular direction except maybe against objectivism, but rather to challenge the notion that there's a simple and easy ideological solution to the world's problems, and that sometimes difficult and not especially satisfying choices have to be made in the hopes that it will make for a better future, as the alternative would be much worse. Now that I've thoroughly embarrassed myself, here's some other stuff I noticed that I couldn't find a place for in the script. Not insignificant is the influence of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which contains a dystopian society with similar elements to Rapture, such as a greatly impactful wonder drug, the artificial creation of people, and the pseudo-worship of industrialists. Some of the levels are named after Greek locations and gods. Rapture is a reference to the Rapture, an event where all good Christians will be taken to heaven on Judgment Day. In the same way, the great minds are whisked away to Rapture, where they all can be free. Adam and Eve were the first two humans in the Bible and ate the forbidden fruit which brought about humanity's suffering. In the same way, the discovery of Adam and Eve, this blue bar that controls your plasmid use, causes the downfall of Rapture. Advertisements around the city are in a 1950s style which fits the time period and is emblematic of hyper-consumerism. The health stations are a mechanic I never used. I destroyed every single one I found to get free medkits. To conclude, I'd like to briefly talk about the character of Tenenbaum. She discovers a love for science while in a German concentration camp where Nazi experiments are taking place in World War II. After the war, she travels to Rapture to continue her scientific pursuits of genetics without the boundaries of morals. She discovers Adam and creates the Little Sisters, but unlike Dr. Steinman or Cohen, recognizes the abominations she has created and the pain she has caused in pursuit of her goals. Despite her hatred of the Nazis and their eugenics, through her experiments and her own desires, she has become the very monster she sought to prevent from rising again. She is racked with guilt, but decides to do better and rescue the Little Sisters, and then you during Fontaine's betrayal. The bad ending of the game has a similar theme. By harvesting the Little Sisters for your own personal use, you become no better than the power-seeking and self-absorbed Ryan and Fontaine, and begin your own conquest of the outside world. By saving them, you inadvertently acquire what Ryan had taunted you for not having: a family, a life, and even free will. After all, it was your choice to save them. Atlas wanted you to harvest them. It's an inversion of Rand's philosophy. Rather than your self-interest ultimately serving the group, serving others comes back to serve your self-interest. There are many times when people are put into impossible situations where their choices on how to proceed are limited. But there is a choice, and great men are defined by how they choose. In conclusion, 7 out of 10. Too much water.
Ocean man, take me by the hand, lead me to the land that you understand. Ocean man, the voyage to the corner of the globe is a real trip. Ocean man, the crust of a tan man imbibed by the sand, soaking up the thirst of the land. Ocean man, can you see through the wonder of amazement at the overman? Ocean man, the crust is elusive when it casts forth to the childlike man. Ocean man, the sequence of a life form raised in the sand, soaking up the thirst of the land. Ocean man,